everybody. My name's Peter Jordan. Welcome to this evening's event, which is kindly sponsored by the Italian Cultural Institute, Venice and the Commedia dell'Arte. I'll begin by giving a short talk about the history and Venice's involvement in the Commedia dell'Arte, and then I'll be handing over to two actors who have been flown in all the way from Venice, who will then give a performance, and then hopefully at the end there'll be time for a question and answers session. So let's get on with it. Okay, the Venice and the Commedia dell'Arte. Well, Commedia dell'Arte is a strange term because it essentially means professional comedy. But it wasn't originally called that. It was called Commedia alle maschere, Commedia all'improvviso. And there was a good reason for that, because the actors who first began performing in this way used masks and improvisation, which was a strange and interesting combination. It was the first professional theatre in Europe, and its symbolic beginning was in 1545, which is the date of the earliest known contract between actors. So we know that from that time on, actors were either being paid, paying themselves, earning money in some way or other, and so the professional theatre in Europe was born. Okay, I'm going to show you a few slides from a collection from the 16th century. And you'll see that they're made up of three distinct character types. And these are master characters. The one on the left is called Pantalone, and he comes from Venice. And the one on the right is called the Dottore, and he comes from Bologna, because Bologna holds the oldest university in Europe, so it was a natural place for the doctor to come from. Then the second character type were the servants, and here we've got probably the most famous one, Harlequin, standing on his hands, and another character called Zanni. Another couple more servants here, Francatrippa and another Harlequin. Then we have the third character types, which are the lovers. And these characters did not wear masks, and they represented the love interest. All the storylines revolved around some kind of love intrigue, often frustrated love or rivalry, jealousy or whatever. But it all came good in the end, and there was a happy ending with the lovers marrying the people of their choice. But not before several ups and downs. We've got master and servant here. This is Pantalone and Zanni again. And another Pantalone and Zanni. These are probably the oldest engravings that exist of the Commedia dell'Arte. And here we've got a Pantalone and a doctor and a Zanni. And they're doing some gag with their hands there. Then we have a Pantalone, a Harlequin, and a Franceschina. They're quite vulgar, some of these pictures, as you can see. Franceschina was a female servant character, and this was another aspect of the Commedia dell'Arte that was really groundbreaking, because it was the first time that real women appeared on stage. In Shakespeare's time, when Shakespeare actually came after the Commedia dell'Arte, women's parts were played by young boys. So this was really groundbreaking, revolutionary, if you like. Excuse me. Here we've got a Harlequin and a Pantalone. You'll notice the name Pantalone keeps occurring, and a Franceschina. Franceschina and Pantalone having a kind of romantic scene, and it seems that Harlequin is jealous and will be doing something to him. Here there's everybody on stage, just about all the characters together, in a rather abstract scene. Here I included these pictures. They're also from the same collection, which is called the Recueil Fossard, because it gives you an idea of how simple the set was. There's just a backdrop, a curtain, and a very small acting area. And you can see on the right-hand side of the top picture, there is somebody trying to whisper something in the ears of somebody else and overlooking. And that's all they would have, would be this curtain which could represent a window or a doorway or whatever. It was all down to the actors and their antics and their interrelationships. And I wanted to include a few pictures of a company called Tag Teatro of Venice. Tag is probably the most well-known of the companies that have tried to revive the Commedia dell'Arte, which is not an easy job if you think that it died out nearly 250 years ago, I think, and how to make it relevant for a modern audience, but still keeping some of the traditional elements in it. So I wanted to show you a few pictures of their most celebrated productions. The first one was the Falso Magnifico. Magnifico is actually another name for Pantalone, the Venetian character. And this was the assembled company there. And the next one was Scaramuccia, or Scaramouche, as we know it in English or in French. And there's a duel going on there. All the plays had a lot of action in them, a lot of slapstick, a lot of playing around. It was highly visual as a form, which meant that it could travel well. So the companies from Italy spread out across Europe, especially to France and Spain and Germany and Britain. And even though the audience couldn't understand the language, they could follow the story because it was so physical and very clear, and the plot lines were very, very simple. And then finally there was a production that I was in with one of the actors who will be appearing today, Stefano Rota, called The Madness of Isabella. And this was based on an original scenario from the 16th century by somebody called Flaminio Scala, who was a member of the most famous company of actors called the Gelosi. And it's believed that this picture here represents the Gelosi in performance and their famous prima donna, who was called Isabella Andreini. And here we have another picture of yet another fight in The Madness of Isabella. And that's all of that lot. Now, I want to move, if I can. Oh no. Can somebody help me? I want to make this fit the screen. Down at the bottom. Right hand side. There? In the middle? Oh, somebody come and do it. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Saved my life. Great. Okay. So, I want you now to focus particularly on Pantalone, because he is from Venice, unmistakably from Venice. He's one of the most famous characters of the Commedia dell'Arte, and certainly the most famous master character of the Commedia dell'Arte. And traditionally, he's portrayed as a merchant, because Venice was a mercantile seafaring city, so it made sense for him to be a merchant. But I wondered in my research whether this was the source of his comedy. And you'll notice, I'm afraid I have to be a little bit indelicate, but you can see in this groin area there is a white handkerchief that is hanging down right in the middle. And it's clearly put there so that you can see the outline of his codpiece. And you can see that the hilt of his sword is also pointing upwards. Even his beard is kind of pointing upwards. And it's all pointing towards this lady who is turning her face away. And there's a lot of speculation as to whether she is embarrassed or whether she is secretly talking to the man on the left who is giving her some advice about how to flirt with Pantalone and lead him along. But it's anybody's guess. And then there's a few people on the left at the back who are also listening in. And again, you can see there's just a simple curtain backdrop and a very bare wooden stage. Now, I was intrigued by this idea of Pantalone being a merchant because I couldn't see there was anything particularly funny about it. But audiences loved Pantalone and found him hilariously funny, and the character lasted for over 200 years. So there was something about it. So I went back to the scenarios, and there's about 800 scenarios or plot lines still in existence. And I looked through all of them, all of the ones that had Pantalone in them, to see, in what way he was mentioned. And looking at one particular collection called the Scala Scenarios, Flaminio Scala, that I mentioned before, from the Gelosi Company, I saw that there were 31 references to him being Venetian, so that was clearly his identity. He was old, 18 times out of 40, and he was a merchant 10 times out of 40, so about 25% of times they mentioned that. And he was rich 7 times out of 40, and noble, they referred to him as being. So he was clearly high status, he was clearly a master character, he was clearly from Venetian, and he was clearly old, and he was also a merchant. But when I actually came to read the scenarios, I saw that the most important thing about him was that he was a parent. And he had offspring, particularly daughters. And I compared the Scala collection with the Correr collection, which is, I think, to be found in Venice as well. And they both date back to the late 16th century. And I think there's virtually no scenario in which he does not have a ward or a son or a daughter or a son and a daughter. And a lot of the plot lines involved arranged marriages, with him trying to arrange marriages of convenience for him, not for his children. Or he was even a rival to his own son, because Pantalone fancied a young girl, and he had plenty of money and his son didn't, and he would do things like send his son off to school so that his son to another city to study, so that his son couldn't muscle in. So that got me thinking, and also the codpiece got me thinking. And now I want to show you a few pictures from, they're actually in Germany, attributed to Alessandro Scalzi and possibly based on drawings by Friedrich Sustris. And they think they date to about 1576 from Landshut in Bavaria. They're a series of murals. And Pantalone, you can see, is serenading on the left. And notice his thighs, they are actually quite youthful looking and very figure-hugging, his hose. It doesn't really look that appropriate for an old man. Here you can see Pantalone on the right, he's actually clutching his codpiece and facing one of the lovers, and then the male lover is playing on a lute there. But we're not sure what kind of narrative is going on there, except that he seems to be behaving a bit improperly. And in tandem with this, I also studied some murals by Vittore Carpaccio, a Venetian painter. And in particular, there's a series of paintings about the legend of St. Ursula. St. Ursula, if I remember the story correctly, was going to marry a prince from England or whatever, and they went to the Pope to get his blessing. And either on the way or on the way back, they were captured and slaughtered. And I think 10,000 or 11,000 virgins were slaughtered along with her. So there was a great slaughter of virgins, and that got me thinking too, because the men in this story, you can see this chap here. He's got rather in the middle. On the right-hand side, he's got rather tight-fitting red hose, which is rather similar to Pantalone. And these men came from very rich Venetian clubs called the Commedia della, which can translate as the companies of the hose. And they were very fond of wearing very tight-fitting hose to show off their masculinity and their youthfulness and whatever. And they were very fond of putting on plays. And it's believed that this series of pictures, there you can see another red hose there, and just the outline of a codpiece there as well. It's believed that this is a performance that was not only arranged by the companies of the hose, but they performed in the play itself. And it's all about the story of St. Ursula, which obviously fascinated them. Next picture. This is going back to the place in Germany, the castle in Germany, just to see Pantalone, to compare back again. You can see this rather muscular body, very tight-fitting costume, and you can probably see his mask, his brown mask, and then the mask of the character on the right is a zanni, a servant. Okay. And now we come back to Pantalone and Isabella Andreini. Just to remind you of that look, because oh yes, and this one, I forgot about it. This actually says Pantalone in love. In lust would probably be a better title. And he's facing this Lady Isabella, who's holding her hands out in a rather ambiguous way as well. Anyway, you know, he's not a subtle character by any means, at least in these pictures. But then, a strange thing happens is, 50 years later, 1618, 1619, a series of engravings were made, and this Pantalone, you can see, he doesn't have a codpiece anymore, and his hands are safely above the erogenous zones, if you like. So he's been kind of sanitized, and he's begun this transformation into a merchant, a miserly merchant character, as opposed to this kind of randy, dirty old man that he started off as. So, you know, tastes change, I suppose. And here, you see the old painting from before. You can see they've chopped off his codpiece. It's gone, and the handkerchief has also sort of disappeared. So there's a kind of, you know, a sanitizing process going on for Pantalone dei Bisognosi. And this is another theory that I developed. This is back to Carpaccio's murals. And the chap on the right is playing a rather disconsolate prince, and you can just see at the bottom of his feet, his one foot seems to be covered by red hose again, quite similar to Pantalone. But another thing that fascinated me, and this is pure speculation, I have to say, if you look up to the top of the picture, there's a picture of the Madonna with the baby. And I thought, that reminds me of somebody. And I saw Pantalone again with his dark cloak and his red hose. And then I found out, his full name is Pantalone dei Bisognosi, Pantalone of the Needy, which is a strange title for somebody who's a miser, I would thought. But I found that there is a chapel in the Abruzzo, in the middle of Italy, called Il Santuario della Madonna dei Bisognosi. And I found this picture of the Madonna, and again, I don't know if maybe I'm just imagining things, but I can see some similarities here with her cape and her red dress, but also even the white fringing around her hood is kind of mirrored in his Pantalone's cap. So it seemed like a possibility that it's a kind of marriage, ironic marriage of the sacred and the profane, and might have been some kind of in-joke with the people of that time. And I speculated that perhaps the companies of the hose were responsible for creating, let's go back, can I go back? Yes, for creating pantalone. I'll give you a little bit of history. It's because in the 15th, 16th century, Venice had been enormously wealthy and very, very successful cosmopolitan city. But by that time, it had started a decline, and they started practicing marriage limitation. And the companies of the hose were the first people to feel that, because they were rich boys and they weren't being allowed to get married. And in this picture here, you can see that there is a single bed there with St. Ursula in the bed, and it's transformed into a double bed, and she's lying on one side and the other side is empty, which could symbolize, since this was commissioned by the companies of the hose, it could symbolize the fact that they were never going to marry because their parents weren't going to let them marry, because they wanted to keep the patrimony, the family wealth, conserved, and they only allowed one son to marry. So that was my theory. The Pantalone came from Venice, but he was the product of the particular social situation. But I feel, yes, Pantalone, absolutely. Yes. In which case, I think maybe it's time for me to retire and hand over to the actors. There'll be plenty of time for you to ask questions if you are interested and want to know more, and I will hand over to my erstwhile colleagues. Yes?